So welcome to the AFT Construction Podcast, and I am Brad Levitt, and we are super fortunate today to have with us Mr. Chris Brandon. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Brad. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, so anyone that spends any time on social media, I can absolutely guarantee that you've seen some of Chris's work and his team from Brandon Architects. They are an architectural firm in Southern California. They're in Newport Beach and do some amazing work. I've been a big fan of your work for a long time, and especially the way that you've cultivated your brand, your reputation, Chris. And social media is really interesting because it's a way that we can not only connect with others, and build this reputation and build this network, but it's also a way for you to showcase your product unlike ever before. So
Sure.
you've had tremendous success on Instagram. So where did that start? Did you have a game plan to go after social media? I mean, how did that kind of work with the business strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, it was kind of, I was guided to it, but we were sort of doing things even before Instagram became really popular. I started the firm in 2009, and it was just me kind of working out of a spare bedroom, working with clients, kind of slowly building things up as we started to get a little more of a portfolio behind us. I saw the value in hiring good photographers, getting good images at the end of a project. That's kind of like our currency, right? It's trading in images and portfolios, past work, and being able to show that off. In the early days, we were using things like Houzz and Facebook, Pinterest, doing all that stuff. I was never like really big on social media myself personally, so I think I kind of missed that generation. But as one of my marketing guys actually early on, it's like, hey, you gotta get your account on Instagram. You gotta get the stuff up there. Like, it's a better platform, easier to share all your images. So I had an intern. Gosh, I don't know, was it back in like 2011 or 2012 or something? Kind of get us up and running, and then just kind of snowballed, started to grow from there. We were super pumped to get like 2,000 followers.
And
Yeah.
now here you are, soon to be 200,000, right? It's interesting how, I mean, you were an early adopter of Instagram, right? I mean, you were on much earlier than I was, but what's interesting is I've never heard anyone use the term currency when they think of photography, as you just mentioned, Chris, which I think is really important. So many of us,
Yeah.
don't spend either the means or the time or the effort to photograph and document, the designs and process and the final project. And for you as an architect, I mean, think your work's really heavy lifting in the very beginning, and then it's off to the contractor and designer and furnishing. So it's even
Yeah.
more effort from you. I mean, how do you manage that complexity of trying to keep in the process, keep communicating with the client and the team, so you have that opportunity to come photograph at the end?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's obviously a lot of work that comes before those finished photographs, and traditionally it took years to get to that point. Like we'd draw a house, it might take us 6 months or a year to get it permitted, and then, it could take at least a year, sometimes 2 or 3 years to build it, depending on how complicated it is. And then you got to hope that you can get photographs right away, but sometimes that takes time too. They got to get it staged, and interior designers got to do their thing. And then the photographs might come back like another month later. And then you'd have to wait even more time for it to get published, right? Like traditionally you have a PR person, they'd go out, kind of shop it around, might take another 6 months to a year to place it somewhere. So like the stuff you literally designed like 4 or 5 years ago is in the magazine finally, or it's out there for people to see. So Instagram has been great, and a lot of social media platforms have been great way for us to just instantly get stuff out there when we get those photographs. I think those are really important, but also just to share in the process too. Like renderings are really great. We saw the value in that early on. Just the technology that we use, being a 3D based firm here, doing everything in BIM, we can see our designs are sort of coming to life digitally before they're ever built. So being able to have these photorealistic renderings done is a great way to share that work as we're designing right now. Before we don't even have to wait for it to finish construction before we can share it, with the masses, which is really cool. So we're able to pump out our most current thoughts and designs and trends before they're really even becoming a reality.
I love that because when you think about, it's so content driven, right? Social media. And for anyone listening, if you're not actively engaged in a social media strategy from all the platforms as you've done, Chris, so well, and your team, is it really shows your talent, right? As an artist, right? You're designing these amazing homes, these amazing projects in these amazing locations. And what you mentioned now is that, yes, in the past, when it was just publications, you had all this time and then you have to get published. I mean, it's a 5-year process, where now it's probably still a 4-year process, to get some of the final photography. But the advantages with renderings and content, now that you've adopted so much as technology, well, this can help your strategy, because you can show things that are modern and current, as well as, things you designed 3 years ago that are still holding true today.
And I think you can kind of see it as it's a sea change too, right? It's almost like this is the ability to do this is I think causing trends and things to shorten too, because, we used to see things cycle, everything comes, there's fads that come and go, and these cycles would be like maybe 10, 12 years long, kind of get into certain styles or whatever. And I think that was a big part of it. But now, people can digest stuff so much faster and so much more of it, that you're seeing these trends shorten, the time frames, and things are kind of getting popular, and, it's just so much more accessible that I think it's going to be hard for these traditional media forms to kind of keep up,
It's interesting. So when you say it is more accessible and people have so much access to now branded architects, where they maybe didn't have that before, how has social media impacted your business, as far as growth or reputation, or just an ability to select different projects that you want to work on?
Yeah, it's been huge, honestly. I think it's brought our work to a broader audience. We kind of built our firm and our foundation and our reputation on doing really great work here locally in Newport Beach and kind of all over Orange County. And really, at the end of the day, your best calling card is your work, and if somebody can, walk down the street and see the house in real life, or be able to walk through it or something, that's the best, best way to experience. But if you can see really great photography and videos and all this kind of stuff online, but you might be in Scottsdale, or somewhere else around the country, the barrier is really low. You can send a DM, you can shoot off an email. Houses have their own little ways of doing things too, but like you could really get your feelers out there if you're a potential homeowner or somebody just interested in design. Like, it's much easier to kind of track down professionals who were doing work that resonated with you. So it really opened us up to a broader audience and allowed us to get little, footholds into some of these other markets, which has been really fun.
See, I think that's interesting when you talk about getting footholds and just having the opportunity to get in other markets. Do you find that you receive a lot of lead generation and opportunities through Instagram or Houzz or some of these other platforms you're using?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. When we have kind of we call it a filter here, but we have a way for people to kind of get in contact with us, and we always try to find out, where they heard about us, where the lead generation come from. Was it Instagram, website, word of mouth, contractor, because we try to keep tabs of, how those quality leads are coming to us.
Well, it's interesting because I think any company, you do have to audit essentially how those leads are coming in, so that you know where to put, those dollars, right? I mean, not that you have to put dollars essentially in social media. I mean, you may, but it's also time commitment. So, are the efforts that you're putting in time of Instagram, is it bringing that fruit to, to our company?
Absolutely. Yeah. I look at it as a huge return on investment. The old traditional way of like, hey, spend a few $1,000 every couple of months on an ad in these different magazines, or you have a, print campaign and all this kind of stuff. Like it's really hard to gauge what your, engagement is. And with social media, it's instantaneous. If you put popular stuff out there, you get the feedback, you get the comments. Even if it's not turning into a job for you right away, you can tell, if it's resonating with people or not.
So, going back to 2009, because I know that there's a lot different looking back, right? You've built this reputation. Social media has really taken a life of its own. You've seen the success and network there, but going back to 2009, this is, one of the worst times to open a company in Southern California, Arizona, where I'm from. I mean, this was a super tough market. I mean, what gave you the courage to say, okay, I'm ready, let's start our business, in this recession?
Yeah, well, I kind of had to. It was do or die. It was. I worked for a couple other local architects, in town, and it was tough, and I was in a situation that just became apparent that it wasn't going to work out long term, and I was newly married, and we had just moved to the South Bay, actually, Hermosa Beach, and it was kind of like I could continue to bail water out of a obviously sinking ship, or kind of go out on my own and try and form a life raft to make it work. So I was lucky to have like one really great client on my own, and I just kind of hustled and tried to make ends meet in those early days.
Which is always tough, starting a company, so was there a tipping point that you had at some point from 2009 to now? I mean, where was that tipping point, and when did you see the business really start to take momentum and you're like, okay, we're in a position now where we can start developing systems and hiring and really, hit our stride?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I look back and think making my first hire was probably one of the more pivotal points. It was, starting the company in the recession, and then just, literally trying to put food on the table for the first couple of years was sort of the main goal. And then as you get busier and, you still think you can kind of do it all, or you're fine doing it all. So having that mental shift, like, hey, I can kind of split my resources here and bring somebody on to help out. But, having that responsibility was a big thing for me too. Like, I've been shaky enough just, providing for my wife and myself, and then having, responsible employees. But it was like the single most important and best thing I did for my company. And that guy's still with me today. He's 10 years.
Wow.
So it's pretty cool. But we've had great retention. So it's, a tipping point, you can maybe kind of look at that, but like really our growth trajectory is, kind of been on the team and stuff that I've built around me over the years.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, any of us to be successful, you have to have an amazing team around you, right? Good people that are passionate about what they do. And, how does that incorporate into the company now, right? The company's grown. And one thing that I've really noticed about your firm is that you're very complex in the sense that you can do a modern style, you can do contemporary, transitional, traditional. So you work through these different styles and aesthetics, so how where does the creativity come from, with the team to work on these very complex yet very different projects?
Sure. Yeah, I try not to have a traditional kind of office structure here, I guess. I mean, it kind of comes from my background of just working for other smaller shops, and never really having that background of being in like a bigger firm. So we don't have like the traditional like design side of the office and production side that you might hear about or interact with. I really kind of believe in like an overall growth and experience for my team. So I try to get everybody involved in every aspect of the job. I think it's one of the nice things about doing custom residential is that they're highly designed. There's a lot of intricacies and effort and details and stuff that you got to go through, but they're kind of a short cycle for architects. They're not, we can design them in about 6 months or under a year, and getting them built in a year or 2 years is actually pretty quick when you think about other, structures and things that people can do in the architectural space. So we basically build a team with each project, and I try to get people kind of exposed to different product types, different designs. I guess you can kind of think of me as the creative director, more so than the president or the founder here. I still try to, keep tabs on everything that goes out of the office. It kind of has to, the design's got to get past me before it gets to the client. But I've just got, really incredible teammates and staff members who can kind of design.
And is there a different?
And,
Yeah, and as far as what the team's working on, I know it passes by you, of course, to make sure that you have your stamp of approval. But is there a certain style or aesthetic that speaks to you most that you like to be involved in or design?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot too. I don't know. I enjoy them all, really. I think for me, there's like a perfect house for a perfect spot. It really kind of depends on the location, the lot size, whether it's views, things like that. I enjoy the modern stuff because I feel like you really do have a very blank slate to start with, but I also really enjoy the traditional. What we do most is what I call transitional. It's sort of traditional rooted vernacular styles, but with a modern kind of twist or updated for our modern lifestyles. And those are fun because I almost find those are harder because you're given like a toolbox right out of the gate, and so your hands are kind of tied in certain things, but you're trying to think outside the box. And, people might love an image of a house that was built a couple hundred years ago on the East Coast, with the shingles and the quaint window panes, all this kind of stuff. But you would never want to really live in one of those.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of walls, small little rooms, and the ceilings are low. So I think it's really interesting adapting that kind of stuff to our modern lifestyles and, indoor outdoor stuff, which we get to do in Southern California, which is huge.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. When you're designing in Southern California, Arizona, you have that indoor outdoor living, which does make a big difference, and especially windows, the views of the ocean or other things that you have in your market that, will change the aesthetic. And as you mentioned, these older homes that are limited from their pitch, they're limited from the ceiling heights and rooms where everything was like very much room driven, whereas now it's more open space, bigger gathering areas, entertainment, which, is a trend that is something we'll see continue, right? Especially with COVID. I mean, that's something that's not going to go away as people are spending more time at home.
Yeah. There's few common threads, I think, in our work. Big open floor plans, indoor outdoor flow, are big ones. A lot of natural light. We're kind of known for putting tons of doors and windows and skylights and stuff into our projects, and lots of volume too, taller ceilings. So whether we're doing contemporary stuff or more transitional designs, it's kind of a common thread.
Yeah, what's interesting from the architect perspective, I have a lot of clients that reach out and say, okay, Brad, what's the process? We want to move forward. We want to do a custom home. How do we get from A to B, right? And so from your perspective, Chris, if someone comes in, if I'm a customer and I'm calling you up and I want to have Brandon Architects design my home, how's that process from when I make that first call, or let's just say we sign the contract today until we have the permit and we break ground? What does that look like?
Sure. We work with clients of all different backgrounds and all different levels of experience with doing this kind of thing, right? Like some of them have built a couple homes already. They've been through the process. Others are just like doing it for the first time. They might be really terrified.
Yeah.
I always tell them that if you've never done it before, you've really come to the right place. We enjoy trying to demystify what architects do as much as possible. We pride ourselves on making our process a very client-focused process. I think that's another one of the reasons why our portfolio is very diverse, is that we enjoy the client's creativity and their passion and their ideas for the project. We kind of take a little inspiration, a little spark from them and their story or their aesthetic and kind of build upon that. But it can get tricky. The other thing I say is that I want them to be happy all the way through the process. I want them to be emotionally engaged and excited about it all the way through. As you know, that's not easy, especially when it comes to the construction, budgeting, and all that kind of stuff. They're always going to get upset at some point. It's kind of a given. Nothing's perfect, but we use a lot of technology. Those renderings we were talking about are a great tool because it takes all the imagination out of it. We don't kind of do the traditional, like, hey, here's your floor plan, then here's this elevation, there's the side elevation, here's the sections, where everything's kind of more mechanical type drawings. And they're, if you're not trained to read those like you and I are, it's hard to envision what the house is really going to look like. So those renderings have been a great tool because it's just like, bam, you can see exactly what the house is going to look like. We put the neighbors in there, the context, even the power lines sometimes, try to make it as realistic as possible. So there's no, imagination required. But there's also like everyone's communicating on the same level too. You and I talk about certain things and we understand each other. The clients, sometimes they might say like, oh, this is really modern to me or contemporary. Like it means something totally different, so just making sure that everyone's on the same wavelength and just trying to talk about the project and understand it is important.
I think that's interesting, the interpretation part, right? Because there is an understanding that you have as the architect, I may have as the builder, and the client has a totally different understanding of what this terminology or some of these words mean. And it's important for us to understand, well, how do we interpret? What are they saying to us? How do we put this in context where they can understand? And not only that, but really interpret what they're saying. When you say it looks too modern and you're like, well, what does modern mean, right? Like, how's that affecting this design? But how do you tackle, I think, the B word, the big one, the budget, right? So, I mean, for you, as the architect, I feel like in a lot of cases you're set up in a really tough position because the client's going to put a lot of pressure on you, Chris, and say, what's the budget? This is our budget. And so how do you navigate that, especially where you're not pricing stuff every day? Things can be built a year down the road, as you mentioned, so pricing could change. So how do you at least give them a pulse or work through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the core concept of keeping the clients happy is managing expectations, right? Like that's what any business owner in our industry is going to tell you. But that's easier said than done. Because like everybody, human nature, we want more than what we really, can afford at the end of the day, or our eyes are bigger than our stomach, whatever. Like it's just kind of the way things can happen. Sometimes the house can come out, bigger once you kind of get your full wish list in there, and everybody's got a budget. Even my clients who don't need to have a budget, they should have a budget. Like I get the practical and pragmatic side of what we do. Even if you could spend $1 zillion to build something, it's not really a good idea. Everything has the right kind of place and budget and sort of balance depending on where the property is located and what it might be worth at the end of the day. So, but talking to clients about the budget is definitely one of the hardest things we do, without a doubt. And it's about, even from the first time I meet them, kind of being honest in what I see of our projects and what the costs are. So that part of the managing expectations, I just try to get out in the open right away. I try not to be the architect that treats the budget like it's an elephant in the room. I don't. It's easy to talk about like, hey, how great our designs are. Here's the process, the renderings, like it's all so cool, and you can get everything you want. But like at the end of the day, they've got to pay for it, and like they've got an idea when they walk in the door of what they want to spend or what they think they need to spend, and you want to make sure that you're kind of lined up there. That what you're going to design, what you're going to do for them is going to be, on level with what they're thinking. And if it's not, then it's just not a good fit right from the get-go. So trying to get some of those big numbers, in the beginning, it's like unit costs. We might talk about, $600, $800 a square foot or something like it. It really depends on the location and the complexity of the job. But we try to use kind of general numbers at least to get us a range or a ballpark. And so that clients can really understand, okay, if I want a 5,000 square foot house, it could cost about this. If I want a 3,000 square foot house, it's going to cost around this, So just, it's a long conversation, but I try to get that out, even our preliminary meetings, just to make sure that before we get engaged, before we go further down the road, that goals are kind of aligned. And then, the actual getting it out to bid and brass tacks of how much the project's going to cost is a tricky process too. As you know, there's kind of the traditional method of like, hey, let's get all the plans done. Let's hire the landscape architect, interior designer. Let's spec everything out. Let's get all the plans done, submit them to the city, and then they go out to the bid at the same time, right? And I'll tell my clients like, look, I'm going to do my best here, but I'm not a contractor. I'm not a qualified cost estimator. Like I'm going to kind of do things that based on my experience, I think are going to work out and work within your budget. But, it's kind of like a disclaimer. I don't really know until it goes out to bid. And then that's when they, the lowest bid might come back like $1 million more than what they're asking. Or that's kind of like the traditional method, right? But what I try to do with most of my clients, and Patterson is one of the better ones out here at being able to do this, is get them kind of hooked up and thinking about the budget with a contractor earlier on, so that as we're going through the different design phases, we can kind of get checks at those phases before they've made up all their decisions, But that traditional method, when the budget comes back over, you don't have a lot of great options. In order to reduce the budget, you got to kind of cut scope, redo the drawings, make a bunch of changes. So you're going to have to pay extra for all these, designers and engineers to change things. So it's better to work with a partner who can kind of, do the work to actually look at what you've designed and put some numbers to it that are kind of based in reality, so that as we go and we get to all those decisions, there's not a big surprise for those clients. I know that's a lot of work, but it's kind of like a design build, de facto design build, right? Like if you and I were under the same umbrella, that's what we would be doing with these clients to get from point A to point B, right?
And I love that you gave those examples, because the traditional method, which I agree, I feel that it does a disservice to the client in many ways, because you're spending all this time working, and your expertise is in the design and architecture and the structural components, right, Chris? And then, for them to go out and price, well, if it comes in over budget, then yeah, what do? They have to start making these massive changes. But if you work, if they have the builder involved with you as architect from the early on beginning, as you mentioned, there's check phases, as you were discussing earlier, that you have designs with a lot of windows and natural light. So, okay, we know our window elevations, we know our sizes. Let's get a couple bids out there from the window companies, right? The GC can do then say, okay, we had an allowance of $250,000 for windows, and now we're at 380. Or do you want to do that, or do we want to make some changes here? And it's really important to have that pulse. And if you're a design build firm, essentially you're doing that anyways. And so that's the advantage. And so how did the clients? Did you ever get pushback with the client? Say, okay, Chris, I understand that you're telling me that I need to bring on the builder early, and it makes sense. I need to get the designer early because now we have the team and everyone can kind of work through this pricing. Do you get resistance that, hey, what if they don't give me good pricing, or
Sure.
what's I need to have more bids?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely goes against conventional wisdom, right? Like the client is thinking like, hey, I don't want to pick my builder now because we don't have everything specified, so he's just going to tell me whatever he thinks it's going to cost, and I'm going to end up paying more, Or like, how do I know that this guy's trustworthy, or how do I know his numbers are competitive with, builder A, B, and C? So yeah, it's it's a little bit of a leap of faith, and it kind of goes against conventional wisdom of our capitalist, building environment we got. But I try to tell them, I try to make it simple, the budget as a designer is only three things I can do to control the budget. There's scope, quality, and timing. Timing is one of those things. Maybe it works out like, hey, we'll build the pool later, or maybe there's a guest house or a certain part of the project that can be phased, so we can kind of break it down into more bite-sized chunks. Scope is really sort of what we're doing as the architects, and really giving them what they ask for, what they want. It's going to be 5,000 square feet. 5 bedrooms, blah, 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 and that's going to be kind of set for what they want. And then quality really comes down to, everything from the door window package to the tile that goes on the floor of the secondary shower. So it's that when you've got the plans all done and all those decisions are made, you really can't mess with the scope. So you're really, your only lever you can pull to get back on budget is reduce the quality, and that sucks. They're going to go through the process having to pick out all the stuff that they're not as happy with, or kind of cutting the quality. So we want to get that scope kind of dialed in there as best we can. So if the house is tight and efficient, it's not too big, then they can spend more of the money on the stuff that they're actually going to be looking at and touching every day.
Yeah, which is huge. And I mean, that communication is so important with everybody. So from a design perspective, how often are you collaborating with the designer as well? Are you having interior designers work alongside you on every project that you do?
Yeah, we do. We try to find really good partners for every project. I'll tell the clients that up front too. It's like we can, and we can do the interior design. We appreciate the interior design. But I believe strongly in the collaboration makes for a better project, and I like to bring on partners and people who are just as passionate about what they do as I am at what I do, and I'll be the first one to say, like, I'm not the guy to take shopping for plumbing fixtures or appliances and stuff like that. But the designers are, they know exactly like where the trends are, what's current, like where to spend the money. Like I stay in my lane. I know what I do and what I'm passionate about, and what I'm very good at, and I like to bring people on board that share that passion and creativity for what they do too.
So what makes, you've built this amazing network, Chris, over the years, the 12 years you've been in business, in your mind, as you're recommending a certain designer or a certain builder to the client, what has the designer or builder done, to build that rapport with you, that reputation where you have the trust from an architect perspective?
Sure. Track record, really, kind of. I mean, it's simple. Do what you say you're going to do. It's sort of the first and lowest bar, maybe. But making sure they show up and kind of hit deadlines and they're producing stuff. That's always the hardest part, right? Like if you've never worked with somebody before, you have to just kind of try and ask them the right kind of questions, maybe get some referrals from past clients or other architects that they've worked with before. But having done it as long as we have, I think I kind of know, the right answers or the right questions and the right answers to those questions to kind of get a peek behind the veil. But I realize that like if there's an interior designer or a landscape architect, somebody who wants to be working with us, that's getting that first project is the biggest goal. Getting some kind of a track record behind us is the most critical, but it's also the hardest.
It's always tough because, clients come in so many different ways, right? We were speaking about lead generation. They can come from social media, website, referral. Do you find that a lot of the customers are coming to you first, Chris, and then you're working on the team? Are they coming from the builder? Are they come from the designers? You built this rapport with them?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. I should probably sit down and figure out percentages, what that is. But it really depends. A lot of repeat clients will rely on their interior designers sometimes when they find another project or a new lot, or they want to do another deal somewhere. Whoever they sort of had a good experience with before, they'll kind of latch onto and go back to, which is great. I think that referrals kind of come from all sides of the design and build industry, really. I mean, I've even gotten referrals from painters and masons and subs on jobs. It's like
That's amazing.
It's kind of everybody understands like who's good at what they do and who they like to work with, and making a referral is like a trust thing, right? So you want to make sure that it's repaid, that you do the best job that you can. That's kind of the best way to treat those referrals. But as time goes by and everybody sort of gets to know each other, they can kind of come from anywhere and everywhere.
You know what, and going back to some of your process, Chris, that you mentioned, what I like, from my perspective, so I've worked with a plethora of different architects and draftsmen on different projects, residential and commercial. And what I've seen, the architects that have really adopted the technology side, doing the BIM modeling, right, and really understanding the renderings and, the visual tours, whether using Inkscape or, Chief Architect, I mean, whatever it is, as they're going through Revit, and they're taking the client through, the experience is so much more valuable. One, for me as a contractor, I'm looking, okay, has my architect thought about where we're putting the ductwork, right? We have this amazing modern house, or we have this great ceiling design, how am I going to get air conditioning? For me in Arizona, this is stuff that I'm always thinking about because it's hot here in the summer. So I better have AC or that client's calling me, but what I've seen is the architects that really take that seriously and are spending time in R&D and spending time in developing, understanding of the software, the advantage it gives them. And so how is that giving you the upper edge, with your clients? Because as you mentioned, it's managing expectations. The client may come in and think, oh, this floor plan looks great, the spacing looks good, but then the minute you start walking them through, the house on a rendering tour, it could change that quickly.
Yeah. No, that's great. It sounds like you really know your stuff too. Worked with some architects that you're throwing out some names that, not a lot of people would recognize. Yeah, we have. I mean, when I went out on my own in 2009, I was used to doing everything in CAD, but I had buddies who worked at bigger firms that were doing a lot of stuff in Revit, and I figured I should take a look at it, see if it's worth it, and kind of just, get my hands dirty with it. And we kind of did that for years. Just this last year, we switched over to ArchiCAD, which is it's just a competitor to Revit. I think it's a little better for the custom residential scale that we do. It's a little more fluid, but it's all BIM, right? So
yep.
BIM stands for Building Information Modeling, and in our world as architects, it does a lot of great things. And when I meet clients for the first time, I will kind of give them a little bit of a behind the curtain view of what that looks like, because it is an engine that runs everything that we do, from our working drawings to the renderings to the VR. That is the platform that we're using. So I try to break it down to three things. Most importantly, it allows us to communicate a lot better with our clients. It's like I said earlier with the renderings, there's no imagination required, right? Like you can look at a 3D object, you can spin around the whole house, you can walk through it, you can do different renderings, you can even use the VR, which has been awesome, to take them on the inside and get a real sense of the scale and sight lines and things like that. So just giving them a deeper understanding, making sure that we're all on the same page, right? Like you said, that when they look at a floor plan, they might think it's great, but when you elevate it or actually walk through it, they might see something that they don't like, even though you like it. So,
Yeah. Well, here's the value. It's interesting,
yeah.
Chris, because I'll give you an experience here, or a story I have. So, when you talk about, the sight lines and, you could have solstice, so you could show them what the sun looks like at 5 p.m. in June, as opposed to maybe, noon in December, right? And how that's going to change maybe where their pool location is and their overhangs and windows and kitchen if they're eating dinner so they don't have a glare. Well, what's funny is, so the pain point for me is, we worked on a project, and this was a hillside build, beautiful house. It's ICF, insulated concrete form. So, the house is built, constructed, and we're literally the day before pouring all the ICF walls. We passed inspection, so all the walls are up. And the client now visually is like, I don't have views of the surrounding of the desert, of the mountain. And so we're changing window openings in ICF. Now, gratefully, we had them poured, but this still was a major delay, right? We're reordering windows. We had windows in stock. I mean, this is a major thing. And the reason, what it came down to is the architect did not have any sort of BIM modeling. They couldn't show the client. Had they have done that, with ArchiCAD or whatever it is, then they could have seen that, and we could have, saved a lot of time and money for the client and us as the builder, diagnosing this early on.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's really one of the biggest things with it is that, in essence, you're building a virtual version of the home first, right? And trying to work through all your problems there, making sure the HVAC, the structure fits, all the drops are there. Recess shades is one of my favorite ones, but like the end result of what the client's going to see when they're inside the home and looking out is huge, or what they're going to experience. And, with the old CAD method, I used to call it the Saturday morning phone calls, because traditionally the only time the client could visualize the job was when it was being framed. And when do they go to the job site? Saturday morning. I'd be like, why the hell is my, ceiling only 8 feet tall over here? I didn't know that. And I have to explain, like, well, there's a roof deck up there. It's the maximum height. It's, it was always in the plans. Sorry, I thought you knew that. Or there's a window, like, why, Chris, why I got this great view of the ocean here. Like, why isn't there a window in this room, or view of the desert, whatever it is. So yeah, it's critical stuff that you don't want to be making changes in the field, because that's just more time and money. So that's secondly, it makes us like better designers, because we can foresee a lot of the stuff and the nuts and bolts and the guts that go into the house with BIM. So we can make your job easier building it. But third, and probably the most important, is that it's actually appropriate for the site. Like the client understands it. It's got the right views and actually, works in reality.
Yeah, I love that. So like the 3 points you mentioned, you talked about communication, which is huge, because now you're starting from the right point, where you're not going to have a client calling you Saturday morning, from the CAD drawings, because they've seen it. They've walked through it. You toured them through. That it's appropriate for the setting, right? And the design of the aesthetic there. And then also it allows you more flexibility in design. What's interesting too is, I have a lot of clients that'll reach out, and this is me as the contractor, and say, hey, Brad, I met with, this architect and this architect, and I'm not to throw a number out there, not that this is your fear, anyone, but just for people to understand, they may say, hey, this architect's $10 a square foot and this one's 15, right? But, the one that 15 is doing BIM modeling and rendering. And, it's easy for me to say, on a 5,000 square foot house, you're talking about 25 grand. This is nothing. Even if you're in a conservative budget, when you think about being able to render this and see the time that's going in, how much money that's going to save? Because I can tell you, I'm going to have plan bust if I don't have them thinking through mechanical and truss calcs and everything else. Whereas, you spend that extra money, that's going to save you hundreds of thousands, right? And it's really easy.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you have that same conversation. I'm sure clients will come to you and say, well, Chris, you may be more than this architect. So how do you walk through that from a cost perspective?
Yeah, you really do it, and that's why some of our initial meetings are really like I try to block out at least 90 minutes, sometimes 2 hours, because it's a lot to cover. I mean, just the budget conversation alone could take up that time.
Yeah.
But try to give them a look under the hood as best you can. Like I really like doing those meetings in my conference room where I can kind of pull up the BIM models and show them, spin through a past project and compare it to finished photos is always kind of fun. Showing them the sun angles and the VR. Like we have a headset in our conference room, and I'll force them to put that on and really experience it. Because if you've never done it before, it's pretty eye-opening, and it looks totally different than when you're just looking at it on the TV.
So when did you adopt the VR? How long have you been doing that?
I think probably 5 or 6 years. Whenever the Oculus One came out, I don't know what that, maybe 5 years. We've been doing it a while. It's been huge because as great as those renderings and having the BIM and all that kind of stuff is great, but anytime you look at a 3D object on a 2D platform, it comes out skewed, right? Especially when you go inside and you're talking about a lot of things like on the periphery. It's the same concept as trying to put the globe in a 2D map, right? Mm-hmm. Things get skewed. So we were having issues walking through clients on these 3D models. They say, God, that room looks really, the ceilings look low, or it looks really small, and the window feels tight, even though it's like, we know it's a huge room and the ceilings are like 12 feet tall. So the VR, the goggles have been huge because we can bring them inside that space. It gives them a depth perception. Now all of a sudden they can feel how tall the ceilings are, like how much space there is between the dining table and the kitchen island, and is the furniture appropriately sized? Like, does it feel like the great room's big enough? You can get far enough away from the TV. Even the size of the TV, like that's always a hot button for people, mm-hmm. right? They want to know how big of a TV can I put over the fireplace? Does it feel good enough? So it's been a real game changer to do that for our clients, to render it out in a realistic manner too. Like, it's more than just the BIM models, as out of the box, are kind of cartoonish. They sort of look like video game from 20 years ago.
Yep.
Which is great. It's still better than nothing. But when we fully render these things out, we put the furniture, the lamps, the lighting, the materials. We really try to make it realistic, even knowing that maybe the interior design is not exactly
what they're going to select to do. Yeah.
Yeah. But just have them experience that space and the scale and the sight lines. We always put all the context in there too, so they know what they're looking at when they look out the window.
I love that. And so from the BIM side, are you outsourcing this? Is most of it handled in-house? Are you developing, all of the designs and renderings internally?
We do. We do it all in-house. We have a great art department here, I call it. I've got talented 3D artists. That's basically all they do. They're easily the hardest working guys in the office too. But yeah, we do all the BIM and everything. Obviously, we're designing with that. We're doing our documentation with that. And our art department is kind of using those. They're using those models to get the exterior renderings, the photorealistic ones, and the VR done for our clients. And those are kind of like our big meeting and decision points. So like at the end of our schematic design, we'll present kind of the final floor plans and the exterior renderings. The client's like, okay, this is great. And then at the end of our design development, once we've fully figured out the rest of the BIM model, done some homework on the HVAC and the guts, and kind of worked out a lot of the details, then we'll do the VR and we'll show them the interior space.
That's fantastic.
At that point, they kind of understand, like, okay, I get it, and I'm not going to make changes, hopefully.
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah, and then we document it, we go through the CDs and get it ready for submittal and all that stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of advantages, for anyone listening, as you're thinking about going through your house and designing your house, if you're to work with someone such as Chris and you think about just going through and making those decisions of the floor plan, the elevation, ceiling heights, visuals. I mean, this is really important, but having the BIM modeling to understand where you can come in and see the cabinetry and see the furniture and do the VR. I mean, it's so valuable, especially now when you, as you mentioned, go to full CDs, to construction drawings, and you're working with the consultants for the structural, mechanical, electrical engineering, you're not going to have a ton of changes or costs because that's already been developed for civil and everything else, which in your market, I mean, my market's really strict. It's become more strict as far as some of the regulations with the HOAs and the city and municipality, but even more so in California where earthquakes and you're building on the ocean and, piers and retaining walls and, all these things that you have to factor in. And it's really important that you have a good basis for the design itself before you really go down that rabbit hole of designing specifically for what you've designed.
Absolutely.
And how, from your side, just speaking of the complex side, Chris, you have a great footprint in Southern California. You've done projects in Vail. You've worked in Denver and Vegas, New Hampshire. I mean, you've worked all over the country. So how, are you familiarizing yourself with some of the codes or restrictions or different construction techniques in some of those markets where it's different than California?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's honestly one that used to keep me up at night a lot.
Yeah.
I think that's like one of the biggest hurdles that I think architects face in doing projects outside of their area, right? Is that it takes years to get familiar with certain codes and processes and to find good builders and interior designers, all that kind of stuff in little niche markets. I mean, I know that Newport Beach is one of the most complex areas to get a house permitted and entitled, maybe anywhere in the world. And it's taken me like over 20 years and I still miss stuff. So thinking about that as a reverse, like, gosh, if I was a guy coming from Scottsdale trying to do a house in Newport, I'd be freaking out. So I think about that, as we embark on these ventures. It's just trying to make sure you set aside time and resources to clear a lot of that stuff, and find those partners as early on as you can. Like really try to engage builders and engineers and people who have that local experience and are willing to kind of share in that. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but I feel like finding good local partners is a cornerstone of success for far away projects. And that comes sometimes. We had a project in Seattle. It's under construction right now, and the client was good friends with the local architect up there, and he was fine, helping us through the design process. And the permitting was actually really easy up there. It was all done online, and you just submit stuff through a web portal, and it didn't physically actually have to be there. But this guy and his team was really gracious and helped us, manage the design, make sure we didn't make any pitfalls for zoning stuff. For us, it's about the envelope, right? Like, at the end of the day, we can hire a good engineer who knows the building codes and seismic and wind loads, all this kind of stuff. For us, it's like, do we screw up by making the house too tall by accident or missing a setback? Like, generally speaking, zoning codes are pretty black and white with a lot of that stuff, but there's always these gray areas. And I think it's the gray areas that keep me up at night.
Yeah. And, shockingly, there's a lot of gray areas. I think about it here in Scottsdale. We still have a lot of HOAs that are different, and they could be next door to each other in Scottsdale. But, the setbacks, the building heights, everything is very different from one to another. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of research. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Knock on wood, it's gone pretty well so far. I think that I'm also realizing that in California, we're very good at making red tape and things difficult. I found some of these areas, it's been a lot easier. Like I remember we did our project in Vail, which I understand the town of Vail is actually pretty tough, but this one was just outside in Eagle County. And we actually had to dust off our code books from like 2007. They were still on like the building code from back then. So it was pretty funny. But yeah, we got permits in like 2.5 weeks or something.
That's amazing. I mean, much different in California. And yeah, if you've already conquered California, they definitely have a different benchmark than the rest of us. So, being sensitive to your time, before we end this, we mentioned about it was keeping you up at night just thinking about building in other areas. But as far as your company itself and your team, what is it that keeps you up at night at this point in your career?
That's a good question. I really do try to keep my clients happy all the way through the process, and I realize that is a high goal. and it doesn't always work out. So there's those situations. It's not a perfect system, you know, BIM, renderings, technology, all this kind of stuff. Nothing's perfect. So stuff always happens. Things can go wrong. Whenever I feel like I've kind of let my clients down, those are definitely the nights that I have a hard time getting to sleep. Like shoot myself in the foot doing something, or I just missed something, or we didn't communicate. We weren't, you know, on having those same expectations. Something happened, something went wrong. So
Yeah, and I can relate. I think that's the toughest thing. It's, you know, as much as we pride ourselves in being diligent with our systems and trying to refine those, and really it's a very imperfect business. It's a very tough business,
yeah.
construction and architecture. And, you know,
Every
when
house is a prototype, you know, like
well, it's
you've
custom
never
for a
built
reason.
one, we've never designed one. Like it's everything's brand new. It's always
It's
different.
Yeah, and so nothing's off the factory line. It's so unique, and you're dealing with thousands of people and installers and products and suppliers, and so it just really complicates everything for you and I. But you know, as you mentioned, it's all custom. It's never been done, and so you're trying to figure it out as you go. So even as you have systems, things get left by the wayside. And you know, we've tried to refine our communication expectation with the client because that is something that we don't want to let them down. But you know, you've
Yeah,
been super gracious, Chris. I can't thank you enough. So,
no
what do
problem,
you
man.
have? Yeah, upcoming and exciting for Brandon Architects.
Gosh, you know, I feel like we got a really bright future. COVID's been kind of crazy. At first, you know, we sort of pulled back and, you know, thought things were going to slow down, but then it was like somebody lit a fire. I'm sure you're
Yeah, it's kind of
feeling it out
crazy.
there as well. So yeah, I think just a lot of these exciting projects we've got outside of our little bubble here in Newport Beach are really exciting. Our project in New Hampshire is under construction now. So I really look forward to visiting that one this summer, doing a framing walk. Later this month, I'm going to Seattle to do a framing walk there. Hoping to do more stuff in Scottsdale. We already have one out there. So yeah, I just, you know, I'm really excited to see a lot of these projects come to fruition. We've always got really exciting stuff here in Newport Beach as well.
And where can our listeners find you?
Hopefully on lots of social media platforms.
And for those who will
Oh,
tag it
it's
in the
easy
notes,
to find us.
it is easy. You know, Brandon Architects is pretty simple, but I highly recommend all of you go give them a follow, go see what they're doing. They just have some amazing designs. And I know, you know, just as we leave this here, Chris, it's interesting because a lot of my clients will bring images of your designs and your projects. So, you know, kudos to you for what you're doing because you are having an impact, you know, on other markets.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Chris.
Thank you, Brad. Hope to see you soon.
Yep.